So what if the life you were living was just one version of you? For the last 3 years, I've embarked on a process of exploring how time, place, and environment influences the reality that we create around us. And within that discovery, I've also discovered that reality is something that is malleable. Reality is something that is coming from within and then projected out. And this podcast is here to explore different methods of quantum jumping, manifestation, astrology, dream interpretation, anything that can help us understand how we create this reality around us. I've kind of taken everything I've learned and placed it in these audio tapes to help me and help you understand how we can create reality together. I'm basically standing at my point of origin, where I'm back in the place where I was born, and I'm trying to understand myself at a deeper level. And I thought, this could be a good starting point in this journey of healing and self-rediscovery and self-discovery and other self-discovery. I just want to start this out by saying this audio tape, this note from the field is not really meant for people who are struggling with sexual traumas, who are more sensitive to the topic of sexual traumas. This is a place where I want to be able to essentially talk freely about my history and my story in hopes that my own personal healing can help you heal potentially. So that's just kind of like forewarning. There's going to be some intense themes discussed here. And this is kind of my own talk therapy to myself of a self-reflection of trauma, because we all carry it with us, and it's a way of, how do we process? Do we carry it? Do we repress it? And for the longest time, I've been suppressing it and repressing it, and once you do that, kind of comes into your reality and looks you right in the face and says hello. That's what I've learned. So anyway, we'll start from the point of origin, and what even is a point of origin, because I feel like I've been traversing various different kinds of realities since, 2020, since the COVID times of I had a specific path that I was going to stay in New York. I was going to establish my art studio in New York, follow in the footsteps of Warhol and how Warhol conducted his work. But then, when COVID came around and kind of shut everything down, and I got to look at the reflection of my reality at the moment, I saw, maybe there is something greater out there. And that's when I began to look at 2 different pathways, or 3 different pathways, really, of saying, could I stay in New York? Can I go to Los Angeles? Or could I go to Italy? And when I created that branching map of different physical locations, it began to create different mental locations at the same time. And there was this moment of just being able to kind of see these new pathways emerge. Then it reflected back into my reality of opportunities to go to these places in the first place. I remember literally a month after creating those different pathways of seeing what life in Los Angeles could look like, what life in Italy could look like, and what life staying in New York could look like. I was on the treadmill running, and I get a call from a dear friend of mine from high school who is living in Los Angeles at the time. And she was like, oh, I'm working recruiting for this company, and I want to see if you'd be interested in actually maybe taking a position with the company in Los Angeles. And I was like, okay, sure. So I applied, and then it was radio silence for 3 months almost. And I was like, okay, I'll just stay in New York, maybe go to Italy as a vacation, whatever. And then it hit around May 2021 or 2022. I think it was 2021, actually. Yeah, 2021. I got the offer to work in Los Angeles, and in a matter of 2 weeks I just picked up my stuff from New York and moved to LA, stayed with that friend, got an apartment, and I began to see a new version of myself in California. There's some backstory. I'm originally from, back to the original point of origin, I'm originally from Port Jefferson, New York, which I'm speaking from right now. Right now I'm in the middle of the woods on a trail taking a walk because I like walks to clear my mind. Sitting in nature, walking through nature helps, process things, and especially if you're going through a moment that was intense, and walking creates motion, and motion creates action, and action creates change. It's those kind of mental and physical alignments that then create spiritual movement as well. Anyway, so I'm in my point of origin, literally down the block from the place I was actually birthed, came into this world, and I'm staying with my family at the moment because I had just lived in Italy for about 20 months or so, almost 2 years, and leaving there was very, very difficult. It was traumatic, and it was something that I'm having to process through this audio journey. So being in my point of origin, seeing my mother, seeing my grandmother, seeing my other grandmother, and it's like, the places that you collected as a child, like little moments of, the greater outside of like the town, the homes, the people, it's now returning to that at 27 years old and seeing the remnants of your childhood and the objects that are from your childhood that really begin to kind of seep their way into the present space. That gives you more context of why you here in the first place. I see myself as someone who is explorative. Going back to the point of origin statement, I am a Sagittarius. I was born the 6th of December, 1996 at 3:40 in the afternoon in Port Jefferson, New York. So if you pull up my chart that was charted in the sky when I was born, I'm a Sagittarius, Gemini rising, Libra moon. So there's a lot of thought and a lot of conversation and a lot of passion and creation that is been born within me. And I could kind of see that reflected around me in my sense of adventure, sense of connecting with people from other cultures, being able to understand, the context of the world that we're in right now at a global scale is something that's, very interesting to me. And being back at this point of origin and seeing like discovering what the root of who I am is a reflection of this point as well, of like, why did I come into the world? Why did my spirit come into the world in this exact location? I think for me, being born in New York is very lucky because it is kind of the crossroads of the world. London used to be that, and then once the colonization happened over here, New York became that center impasse, and being attached to your ancestors who have come. Like for me, like especially when I was living in Italy, when I told an Italian my heritage, it's British, Scottish, German, Danish, Sicilian, which is Italian, and I think there was one more. No, I think that was it. I could count it on my hands of like, I'm all these different things, mainly because I was born in New York, and that was the place where mass migration happened in the first place. So when you think about all these different cultures kind of blending together, which we know as a melting pot, you also carry those elements and those traumas and those experiences from each of those ancestors to who you are today. And that's something, being back at this point of origin, back to the main point, has led me to discover why I've come here and why I have certain attachments and certain experiences that come from past lives that are re-manifesting in the present reality. So that's kind of the baseline for what I want to discuss in this audio tapes, or just as a way of understanding myself at a deeper level. And if it resonates with you, then that's good. If it doesn't, then that's good too. We maybe aren't supposed to resonate all the time. But anyway, so going back into this past life trauma that has re-manifested most recently into present day trauma for myself. I remember when I was in California, I was literally about to go to Italy for the first time on holiday, which was just like, at that point I was working remotely. It was 2022. It was like March. I was in Los Angeles, and I was like, I've picked up this bug of like wanting to explore more and wanting to travel more, experience different ways of being, all that kind of stuff. So I was working remotely at the time, and I asked my manager, and I was like, hey, can I work remotely from Europe? And she was like, let me think about it. She got back to me, so she said sure, and I was like, great. And I was like so lucky and so privileged at the time of being able to do that in the first place, of being able to just have a computer and I could go to a foreign country and I have financial support being there. And that was something that I was so grateful for, because not a lot of people have that opportunity. And so I did it. And I remember before I left, I had gone to see a psychic because I was like, I'm trying to understand, if there's any messages that need to be sent with me on this journey. And it was actually strange because I visited a psychic in, I think it was like Echo Park or Los Feliz in like East side of LA. And this woman told me like, there was some things that resonated with me a lot, and it was connections to past life trauma that hasn't been resolved. And she told me that I had trauma in my root chakra and in my throat chakra. I'm not really well versed in the chakras, and which maybe this is a way for me to begin to understand more. But what she sensed was there was trauma in the root chakra, sexual trauma from a past life, and also trauma in the throat of some sort of strangulation, crushing of the voice, suppressing of the voice, that made this version of myself in right now Andrew has been carried away. That like this trauma hasn't been resolved, and it's up to this lifetime of experience to resolve this trauma that's been carried from a different life. And when I heard that, it resonated with me, because I don't know if it gave me an excuse or something of seeing, there's something in my childhood that makes sense that happened, and it tried to give me more context of what I was going through back then. And for me, I kind of put it in the back burner, put it away, and I was like, okay, let's go across the world and begin to traverse the physical plane, of experiencing a different culture, live in a different culture, pick up, a different language. And who do you become when you are speaking a different language? So I had all these questions ruminating of like, who I could be, what I can be in a different world, was that rejection of the current self, so I flew over to Italy, and I stayed there for 3 months, and it was 3 months of just being able to have pure euphoria. It was like the thing of like, I was so open and I was so free. I was so able to, connect with new people, and that was kind of my impulse, was to connect with all these new people and just expand my mind globally. And I did that and traveled through Paris to London to Dublin, kind of exploring these different, traces of my ancestors, And then I flew back to New York, and I stayed with my father for, I think it was a couple weeks. And then I went back to Los Angeles, and I had lost my job. So I got to Los Angeles, lost my job, and I was like, for the first time in a couple years, it was like that moment of, okay, what is my financial outlook look like? And I kind of had like this intuitive moment of like, I knew it was coming, and if I am able to get a severance pay, then I would be able to pay my rent and then pay for a camera that then would allow me to start my own business, opening a film and like photo studio for clients. So that ended up happening, and it was the fall of 2022, and I was running around Los Angeles, hustling, which is great, because I find there's these balances that we have where we have these hustle moments where we make money, and then we need those moments of quiet and chill. So I went back with this mindset of like, okay, I'm gonna hustle and start my own business and start my own thing. And it was going well until there was a moment that, now we're gonna talk more about my sexuality and things of, that nature, because that's where this kind of different chapter began. Since I was little, I always kind of knew I was gay. There was like, I didn't really have any like interest. Like there was interest in girls, but it was like interest in like, being friends and like being funny, of like, oh yeah, you're my girlfriend, that kind of thing. Even when I was like a child, like 10 years old, I remember I had a girlfriend, but it was more of like, oh yeah, she's my girlfriend and we're best friends, but she's my girlfriend. And so I decided to, kind of be restricted through my high school years. I really didn't have like any relationships. I grew up on Long Island, outside of the city. In this, New York City is a very like gay friendly and accepting place, but like out here it's kind of like more conservative, and it's something that I never saw myself trying to pursue. Like I had no sexual desire while I was in high school, which was strange, because there's so much reflection of like, oh, you go through puberty, you have that awakening, but I really didn't have that awakening until I was in college. I was literally like my freshman year, and I was like, okay, here we go. But there was elements of myself that I've always been like, there's more feminine elements to me, and I also have a masculine side. Like for me, I've always struggled with weight, which I think is also a reflection of my own like mother's trauma of like, I just remember, going to Weight Watchers with her as a kid, always like having restriction around food, or like non-restriction around food that led to weight gain. And there was always this fluctuating. Like for me, I'm always I'm not always the same. Sometimes I'm a little bit more heavier set, and then sometimes I'm very skinny. It's like, for me, it's like it always fluctuates, and it also has to do with, my mental state at the time. So I found that, I was a bit more like, when I gained weight, I would become a little bit more feminine, and when I lost weight, I was more masculine. And it's kind of strange when you think of that way, but the beauty, I think, in myself is there is these masculine and feminine energies that exist within me, and one can take over the other and vice versa. But it led me to discover my sexuality more of like, okay, in the gay world there's like topping and bottoming, and I'm like, I find that I'm more of like a bottom, and I'm more submissive when it comes to like sexual sides. So that exploration when I was in my early 20s began to come into fruition when I was like living in New York City, mainly being like attracted to older men and older people who like have that like security around them, that then makes me feel more secure, because I'm like the crazy explorative, like you can't pin me down. Like being around someone who's very grounded, someone who's very based in routine, has always like attracted me. So I had moved to LA, and I had like dated an Italian guy, and that was like the first kind of like impulse of like, okay, I'm being shown signs of like I should spend some time in Italia. Like the relationship with that man didn't really work out that well, but it was a thing of kind of being exposed to a potential future, and then when I had returned from Italy, lost my job in LA, got back into creating my own studio business, there came a point I was like actually working on signing a pretty large client, and I was in LA and I was raped. And this experience led me to kind of what I've been processing for the last year and a half. And for me, it was something that in the moment and the moments after, I didn't realize kind of what has happened, because it was like when you're going through a moment like that, you kind of just like black it out, and then you're like, okay, let's not think about it. And I had actually had this experience from Grindr. It was a thing of like you begin to like learn more of like how to approach the contemporary day of 30 years ago, we didn't have apps that connected us to random strangers that, you would just randomly have sex with, And now that's a reality nowadays. It's like you can put in your ideal person down to the height, to the weight, to the build on these apps, and then they just show you, that ideal person. But it's like, is that ideal person something more superficial, or is there more reality, So when I had this experience in LA, and I was like, coming off of it, meaning like I distracted myself of like, oh, I just got into working like 24/7, that I had no ability to process what happened to me at all. And there was a moment when I was like, okay, I'm going to book a ticket and leave LA again and go to Italy for the holidays, for Christmas, and just like have time to slow down and just kind of like breathe for a moment after all the hustling. So I did that. I returned to New York, passed over, and then went to Italy. And when I got there, it was at first okay. It was like something where I just wanted to speak with friends that I made from the year before, hang out, just take a month off and just breathe, And then that's when reality began to shift, because I had left my LA apartment to be sublet on Airbnb, and it was my friend's apartment to begin with, so I was subleasing from her, and she was like, okay, I'm going to put it onto Airbnb. And like 3 days in to me being in Italy, this is 2022, at the end, like December, transitioning to 2023, I was planning to come back to California, LA at 2023, January. So I get a call from her being like, oh, the people who Airbnb'd the apartment actually canceled it. And I was like, oh, interesting. What are you going to do about it? And she's like, I don't know, like maybe if you know anyone. So I kind of put out some messages if like someone was looking for an apartment for a month. Nothing. Then it kind of hits New Year's time, and I get a text from her being like, hey, when do you want to get your stuff? I could only rent the apartment long term. And I was like, what? I'm coming back to LA in 2 weeks, and you've rented the apartment out to someone else. And it was kind of just like this confusing, like miscommunication. And so then I was kind of like at this crossroads again of like, do I want to go back to LA or do I want to stay in Italy? So I made the decision to stay in Italy, and after I made that decision, I was looking for a place to, establish long term after working through a visa, and there was this studio that came onto the market on Facebook, like housing or whatever in Italy, in Florence, and I saw it and I was like, maybe this is a place to live in. Like I was kind of trying to like see what this studio is like, if it's the office, kind of that place. So I go to view the studio, and as I walk across town, where I was staying temporarily was in this neighborhood called Sant'Ambrogio, and then the studio was in San Frediano. So it was about like 30-minute walk across the town to the studio. So I walk into the studio, and I ring the bell, and then the door opens, and this wonderful Australian woman answers the door, and I just kind of felt like chills rush over my body. And I walked onto the terrace, and the terrace was surrounded by tombs, like headstones. And I was like, am I in a cemetery? And she's like, yeah, you're in the cemetery. And I was like, okay. She's like, the house used to be the the person who managed the cemetery. There was a house that he kind of lived in, and then now it's been converted to living in workspace. So the downstairs was workspace and the upstairs was living space, and there was various different kind of tenants in the place. Like there was 3. And so I was like, began to see a future form in this place. And I was like, I would like to rent it. It was around my price point, and I didn't know where I was going to live, but I was like, I'll figure it out. Like if I'm able to actually have a physical studio instead of a digital studio, then I could begin to create my own path. And it was by living in that studio and working in that studio that I was able to begin to understand the trauma that I had experienced in LA and see how I could have a rebirth from this state. Because through talking with this woman who lived in the cemetery for 10 years, and I'm just going to kind of keep, names out of the context for the moment, but this woman who lived there, she was also raped like me. And there was this almost symbolic transfer of the space and the energy of the space from her to myself that allowed this new platform for healing within. And then over the course of the next 18 months, I stayed in that studio until my visa was over. And I didn't live there the whole time, but I worked there the whole time. It was my base that was there. And through this studio, I was able to uncover past lives that have come into contact with my being over the course of centuries even. And for the first time, I was able to see myself from a different perspective and understand myself from that perspective of, there is this saying, I'm even just going to steal it from another spiritual talker from the ether of the internet, but there is that saying, I think Rhea Earth says it a lot, is you are the universe experiencing itself from one specific perspective, and that we're brought to this place to experience what it is to have these full sensory experiences of taste, touch, smell, all the basis from when we were a child. But the reason why we're here is to have a deeper understanding of the universe and its infinity. So through this journey of traversing all these different realities, I've discovered that the self is not actually, the physical body and the mind, but it's actually the reflection. The self is the reflection of what you experience. So you are the trees, you are the sky, you are the sun, you are the clouds, you are the moon, you are the sun. It's all these celestial bodies are actually the reflection of yourself. And that has kind of ended my travel, because now I know that wherever I go, I will always carry myself with me, and that I will be who I am. I can't have a place won't change who I am. It might bring out other elements of yourself, because I think environment does play a bit into identity, but it isn't the full identity. So that's why I wanted to create these audio tapes of discovery. When I go on my journey back to Los Angeles, right now I have 1 week left here in this point of origin, Port Jefferson, New York, to then move back to Los Angeles. And, I wanted to have the ability to create these tapes on this journey of healing and discovery. And, it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be hard either, but it's going to be a lot of focus. And that's what this new chapter of my life is moving into. Focus and dedication, creation and completion, So thank you for listening in to my being for this half hour.